Easy Riders, Raging Bulls is one of the most recognizable books about the Hollywood film industry, not least because it uses the names of two of the most famous films released in the era the book is concerned about. And it's actually a really good title because it basically sums up the entire period. Written by film historian Peter Biskind in 1998, and with a documentary adaptation later released in 2003, the book follows the rise and fall of the Hollywood New Wave, the period during the late 1960s to the mid-1980s where in Hollywood, in stark contrast to the studio system of old and the studio system of new, I might add, the power of movie making was put into the hands of creative young filmmakers who became known as the movie brats. The movie follows the production of specific films in great detail, such as Bonnie and Clyde, The Godfather, Taxi Driver, Star Wars, The Exorcist, Chinatown, Jaws, Easy Riders, The Last Picture Show, Raging Bull, and, of course, Heaven's Gate, which almost single-handedly ended the Hollywood New Wave. The extensive amount of juicy production details and Hollywood gossip detailed in the book largely comes from hundreds of direct interviews with many of the characters mentioned in the novel, even some infamously reclusive people. He also spoke with burned exes and lesser-known insiders. Interestingly, many of these interviewees ended up denouncing the book. Steven Spielberg, for example, said that every single word in that book about me is either erroneous or a lie. Roger Altman was critical of both the book and of Biskind's methods, saying it was hate mail. We were all lured into talking to this guy because people thought he was a straight guy, but he was filling a commission from the publisher for a hatchet job. He's the worst kind of human being I know. Francis Ford Coppola alleges that Biskind only interviewed people who had a negative opinion of him, which I have to say is definitely not true because Coppola is praised a lot in the book. William Friedkin, when asked about the book calling him a womanizer, a tyrant and a bully, said, "I've actually never read the book, but I've talked to some of my friends who are portrayed in it, and we all share the opinion that it is partial truth, partial myth, and partial out-and-out lies by mostly rejected girlfriends and wives." Peter Bogdanovich was very angry with the book's portrayal of him, saying, "I spent 7 hours with that guy over a period of days, and he got it all wrong." The thing is though, these guys would say stuff like that because many of them are portrayed to be utter degenerates in many ways. Some are horrendously egotistic, others are junkies, some sleep around and betray their wives, others physically abuse their caste, some resort to dirty tactics and throwing their friends under the bus to get ahead in the Hollywood game, and others do all of these things. This is not a hero worship book. If anything, it's an expose of Hollywood, a sneak peek into the insane world of a group of crazy bastards who are completely out of touch with the real world at points in their lives. Megalomaniacal and self-destructive, selfish and ruthless freaks. In a classic case of never meet your heroes, if you're worried that your favourite film director might come off as anything less than perfect, then it might be best not to read the book at all, because pretty much no one comes out unscathed. In fact, reading this in today's age really puts into perspective the cancel culture we have, where famous professionals can have their careers dumped in the toilet because of a harmless tweet, and yet some of the characters in this book, who today are some of the most respected and veteran filmmakers around, come off as completely deranged and unhinged. How much of the book is true? Who knows? But I appreciated the introduction of the book mentioning that anecdotes and stories in the novel could be false or biased, as they come from interviews from the industry insiders who are now decades old, and many of them were too coked up at the time to even know what planet they were on. But if you have an interest in New Hollywood, my personal favourite film moment, if you're interested in guys like Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese and how people like these got their movies made, then this is a great book for you, perhaps the greatest book there is on such a subject. This is a really down and dirty book, lots of dirt being dished and salty grudges being held. Biskind needs to be commended for the way he holds it all together, with the book presented in an entertaining, almost sarcastic at times approach, weaving in real-life interviewee quotes with his prose and storytelling, instead of going down the cold, analytical route. The novel is fantastic to gain detailed knowledge on how the new wave came about, but the book is also the equivalent of that guy in your group who won't shut up and eat his restaurant pasta and instead insists on gossiping about everything and everyone. Of course, that's partly the point of the book, but it can get tedious at times, with numerous chapters devoted to this person sleeping with that one and that person sleeping with this one. And one thing that tended to happen with me when reading the book was that there were some Hollywood characters who I wasn't that familiar with or I didn't have that much interest in. And when an entire chapter is dedicated to such a person, it can be a bit of a slog to get through. Like, there's so much about Warren Beatty's obsession with getting his now forgotten projects off the ground. And then the book will focus on someone you're interested in, and suddenly you sit up in your seat and it becomes ferociously entertaining. Like the bit about Scorsese being so coked up and furiously banging a telephone while he was talking to someone on it and breaking it, then going down the elevator, putting a quarter into the payphone and continuing his tirade against his victim. It needs to be noted going in that this book gives you more information on the people who made the films rather than the films themselves. I imagine that some people will come away with their thirst not quenched, frustrated that rather than having examined the socio-political movements of the new wave, the ins and outs of how our favourite movies got made, to get this stuff you have to wade through a lot of the clutter about people being on drugs and being unfaithful. The highs were high, but the dreary lows were ever present. I found it satisfying, entertaining, and it gave me a lot of new knowledge, but I was exhausted by the end of it and welcomed the closing of the final page.